All right, everyone, it is another episode of Advanced Tactics. We're going to be talking about my favorite army, not only in Grimdark Future, but also in the 40k lore, which is the High Elf fleets, or Eldar, as I always consider them to be in 40k lore. So, this army is very near and dear to my heart. It's the army that both regarding the official army and my own custom army that I've had the most games played. So it's sort of like of all the advanced tactics series, I think that I feel I have the most experience to be able to comment pretty accurately, at least in my opinion, of this. So it's a D tier army. I'm not going to go into why, and we're going to talk about just the nature of high elf fleets, not just as a competitive army, but as a fun army. And sort of the theme that I would run with this army is just rolling sixes. So before we get that in mind, hey, I'm trying to push to 1,000 subscribers. If you are watching my videos and you like what I'm doing, we'd really love just to like, subscribe, and comment, but especially just subscribe. It's really going to help me to get to 1,000. Would really appreciate everyone's support here. If you like what I do, just continue to support the channel. So, with that in mind, let's get into that. I do consider them a D-tier army, and we're going to get into sort of why that is. They're a very unique case. We've talked about this before for all the advanced tactics. We are giving some assumptions here. We're competing against the other official armies or the other balanced custom armies that we are talking about here. This is a competitive setting. We're always thinking about that 5 or 6 game GT for the consistency's sake. So, and I always go into that, right? When I'm thinking about these armies, I'm not thinking about them in terms of just maybe going against your friend and maybe being able to tailor a list to one particular army. You know, these armies, when I rate them, they have to have a general all-comers list to them. And so that's a difference sometimes, that some people who see this, maybe they play against their opponent and they say, oh, I'm able to do very well with this army against my friends. You know, if that sort of local meta is fine in the sense that you can tailor your army against your friends, but we have to think about this 5 or 6 game GT and the meta that as a whole that's going to produce. I always think about 3,000 points. I went into it before. 3,000 points, I think, is eventually where a meta is going to end up on the more competitive side. OPR, especially as people get better at it, we're still in sort of that learning phase with OPR Grimdark Future, where people are still sort of getting introduced to it. But when we think about a competitive scene, they're going to know the rules very well. They're going to be playing at larger points, and they're going to want larger points. The other thing is, of course, no allies. We have to sort of judge these armies on their own. So those are the assumptions. Let's just go to the criteria that I've always held up. I was going to maybe I actually played some games of 3.3 without some of the 3.3 rules, and at the end of the day, we're sort of back to 3.2-ish. Point being is that I spent some time trying to reevaluate how good armies were, and then I found out that, well, we're just going back to the old way. So again, at the end of the day, I feel that my assumptions from 3.2 still stand. So the idea of just being flexible or really strong playstyle, raw efficiency is it's still very important in this game. No pistol or hybrid taxes, a good spell list. When you have a good spell list, and I think a lot of people, one of the things in Grimdark Future, a lot of armies actually don't have good spell lists. And so I've heard people say, well, casters aren't really that good, and if you play an army that doesn't have a good spell list and doesn't have caster 3, I can understand you. But there are armies that have very good spell lists and that have that caster 3 and can just really do a lot of work with their spells. So a good spell list is pretty key. Impactful elites, cheap chaff, that's two things that are just so important in a tournament setting. One, being able to trade away and minimize your point losses when you trade something away, and two, you need to have impact. You know, especially any sort of army in this game, you need to have about 1 or 2 units, generally combined units, that can have impact, that can hit something and generally maim or destroy something of the opponent's. It doesn't mean everything has to be combined units, but a good army, and I'm going to get into this more and more when I talk about general army building theory, you want to have at least 1 or 2 units, depending on a lot of factors that go into it, of impactful elites, things that consistently hit something and destroy something. So you need meaningful upgrades. And I go back to it. I think that casters, well, everything's sort of back where it was. So even with the advanced tactics, even with effectively doubling of points, the advanced tactics is still tremendous. And Caster 3 are just two particular upgrades that I think, with a spell list, are terrific. Access to Scout and Ambush is always very important in the game. In particular to Grimdark Future, when we talk about, some people sometimes who've played Age of Fantasy sometimes don't believe that AP4 is that important, but in Grimdark Future specifically, AP4 is very important. And Undead is, luckily, was sort of was brought back down to 1s, 2s, and 3s. I was really glad that they took back at least the change of Undead. Failing on 1s or 2s sort of just been, boy. Anyway, so those are the criteria. They still stand as is. Let's go into how High Elf fleets sort of measure up. So they're not very flexible. I've heard some people say, and it's sort of true, that High Elf fleets are sort of a specialist army, but they're really not. Other armies just specialize better than them, and that's because they have a lot of pistol and hybrid taxes that really hurt a lot of units. So in other words, High Elf fleets do have specialist units, but they're not as specialized as other armies because they have those pistols and hybrid taxes. Really limits the sort of armies from a competitive standpoint that you can bring. Now, I love playing my High Elf fleets non-competitively, the official army, but obviously in a competitive sense, I'm going to do things differently. They don't have a good spell list. Generally speaking, we've already seen High Elf fleets has been touted as sort of the telepathic or psychic experts, but their spell list is pretty bad. Impactful elites, they do have some impactful elites, but not, and they don't have good chaff, and this is a real difficult thing about the army, not having good chaff. It's one of the things that really hurts the army badly. They don't have good chaff. They don't have really meaningful upgrades. Of all the armies that I thought should have gotten advanced tactics, they don't get it. They do get access to Caster 3, but without that good spell list, it's sort of not worth it. They do get access to Scout and Ambush, and they do get some pretty good access to AP4. They're not undead. Alright. So let's go into the army list overview. There's a lot to talk about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, as we go through the army list, there's a few things I want to point out. One is just High Elf fleets, and I've played these guys since 2nd edition. I've played them for about a year now. A lot of experience. The army is inextricably tied to rending. So many of their baseline units have rending that as rending sort of goes up and goes down, has been changed, so the army changes itself. They have very little upgrade flexibility. This is an army that their troops, and I think this is something I would love to see in the redesign, give their troops more options and flexibility. They get very limited. They basically get no upgrades, and it's something that I think really hurts the army. I think they could get some flexibility in there, and that's the thing. They don't have that ability in their units. There's also sort of been some recent, actually, nerfs to the army. I think that coming from it, one of the things that I think is a small change, but it's pretty important, is the Banshee Shoot now has sort of Fear 2 tacked onto it. The Banshee Shoot that gives Strider to a leader used to just be 5 points for Strider, but now they've tacked on a Fear 2 on top of that. So you're now have to pay 25 points for a leader to run with a Banshee unit. And the Banshee unit with a leader would be really good to give them that regen. So that's definitely a nerf. The other thing is that losing the Deadly Lances on their jet bike strikers, it's a big deal, actually. I played a lot of jet bike strikers before they sort of, again, they immediately got the Scout tacked onto them. That could have been an upgrade. And the other thing is they lost those Deadly Lances, and that's a big deal. Like those bikes having some sort of mobile AP2, AP4 with those Star Lances is a really big deal. So yeah, it's been a nerf. It's funny. I've actually sort of seen the army get a little bit nerfed. All right, and afterwards we're going to go into some of the general tactics that I'll talk about. So for now, we'll go into just the army lists, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll get into an actual competitive list that I see, and we'll talk about some of the general tactics, a few of which, one is just rolling 6's. The army, with being inextricably tied to rending, it is, if you watch my other competitive corner, I'm not going to bring up rending again and all the problems that rending has sort of caused with one-page rules. But it is an army that ultimately just you need to roll sixes, and that is a really inconsistent strategy. You can absolutely win any games with high elf fleets if you roll sixes, but from a consistency standpoint, we're talking about that 5 or 6 game GT. You're going to have games that you're not going to roll as many sixes, and then the army is just really going to suffer. And you need to roll those sixes early because you don't have a lot of chaff, and if you have that one turn where you can't hit those sixes, then you're just going to get sort of overrun. Your other tactics, I think, is you do need to spread out. You do have that fast. Fast, as we're going to get into it, the real benefit and value of fast is generally when you rush or charge. So high elf fleets, in a lot of ways, are sort of a hand-to-hand army. You're going to maximize your benefit with fast when you're rushing, right? Because moving 2 inches is good, but it's when you can rush those 16 inches. That's the real impact of fast. And as you're going to get into the army list, a lot of their units don't synergize with their special rules, which is fast, and very fast for some of the other things. Their upgrades and their structure of their units, they're not, again, they don't complement each other. I would always tell people with high elf fleets, you want to focus on sort of close range shooting and hand-to-hand. You're better off fighting in hand-to-hand, and you're better off getting close range to sort of manage that distance with your fast. Generally speaking, if you can do generally the 18 to 24 inch range with high elf fleets and then sort of dance around your opponent, you're going to do okay. The other thing is that I've played a lot of games with high elf fleets. I'll tell you, at the end of the day, if you win, it's generally not a fun way for your opponent to do. Generally speaking, if your opponent is bringing a lot of regen and you just sort of counter it, or if you roll a lot of sixes, there's like, and I've played a lot of games with high elf fleets. It's not a fun army for your opponent to play against. And then we're going to get into the competitive list. So, all that being said, let's get into the army list overview, and we'll start from there. Alright, so we are in the official Grimdark Future army and high elf fleets. Let's just go down and look at the upgrades. So the biggest upgrade we'll talk about here is this hit and run. And I go back to it. Hit and run is not a fun rule. I think it's something that high elf fleets can really leverage to their advantage. In my versions of high elf fleets, I've pretty much removed hit and run. My view is generally rules like hit and run are just not fun, and I generally in my custom armies would avoid doing it. But in a competitive sense, it's their one thing they have is very good. Let's just get into their spells. Their spells are generally bad, so the level 1 hide is a pretty rough spell. Remember, let's get into the nature of high elf fleets. They have some good caster options, but they're pretty squishy. And to get within 18 of a unit to make something not to get -1 to shoot it's not a good spell because you're just putting yourself in range of getting charged. And their casters are not tough. They're pretty squishy. So I don't suggest this is a really bad level 1 spell. They have some decent damage, but I mean damage spells are all pretty much the same. Then of course they have their creator, which is this is the best spell they have, right? Which is this +1 defense. The defense buffs are generally not as good like the regen buffs. The moment someone can just shoot it with anything else and remove that +1 defense. This defensive spells are always good on hand-to-hand units. The idea being you're able to give a unit +1 defense and then charge into something and then have that +1 defense to protect you on the backswing. So generally speaking, the +1 defense is okay, but it's not a great spell. And then of course they have a terrible level 3 spell. It's a level 3 spell. The capstone spell is so important for an army because it can generally make or break that. And to get a spell that gives them +2 to charge when so many of their units have quality 3 that are hand-to-hand, and their stingers that we'll talk about have reliable, it's a capstone spell that doesn't synergize with the army. So, and this is supposed to be sort of the caster, the really important telepathic caster army, and their spell list is really weak. One of the weakest spell lists, I think. Let's get into the Elven, their troops. So first of which is the Elven Nova. Elven Nova is pretty good. Shield of Grace and Hit and Run are good. He does get Caster 3, but again, not the spells to back it up. And I think that Isle Fleet's an advanced tactics. That just makes sense with the army. Two really good ones. One that I think is, in a competitive sense, you need to play Hit and Run with a certain sort of units. I just don't encourage it because it's sort of, again, you're apologizing to your opponent afterwards because it's very unfun to play. And I go back to it. More than balance, games have to be fun. The other thing, Shield of Grace is also really good, which is just a regen. That's fine. He's got some, he's got some decent upgrade. Nothing great. The sniper rifle is decent. It's, I don't like sniper in competitive sense. The game is just way too fast, and I don't really see. The best one I think we'll get into is this Master Web Spinner. And I'll talk about this setup that we'll go into. But, the standard general loadout. Not a lot of great hand-to-hand options. Again, I would prefer armies that have at least a 3 or 4 hand-to-hand option. They've only got the energy disappear with 2 attacks. This Master Stinger Blade is pretty bad, just with poison. You can't get a unit stealth. Stealth is, again, one of the problems with stealth and high elf fleets is high elf fleets, you really want to sort of get up close, but you sort of want to manage that distance. The way you win with high fleets is staying in that 12 to 18 inch range. And a lot of times when you sort of get close, you lose a lot of benefits of stealth because someone can just basically get into that 9-inch range. It's decent, but not great. In the upgrades, we already talked about this, and it's really frustrating that this used to just be a 5-point upgrade for Strider that you could put them in the Banshees. I'm going to oftentimes use their old names because, it's too confusing. But now you're stuck with the Fear 2 automatically. 25 points is a lot. The other upgrades, I think the best one here is probably the Shifter Suit, which is this ambush and teleport, and where you can do sort of fancy stuff, or your Stinger Suit, where you can just put him up with your Stingers. So this is pretty good. Yeah, the jet bike's okay as well. Alright, that's just your guy. Nothing great on these heroes, just so you know. They're heroes, and the Protectors, these are basically the same upgrades for both of them. I think that if you're gonna, since both of them have the same upgrades, it's almost always better just to go for the Noble. 15 points more is worth for the Quality 3. Since they both have the same upgrades, it's almost never a good idea to go for the Protector. Alright, let's just get into the melee troops again. Acolytes are pretty terrible. They are only Def 4 and 1 hit. They have the Seer Council, but the problem is they don't have a lot of good spells, and it's just not worth it. Like, this is very different than perhaps we talk about with Alien Hives. Like, Seer Council or these abilities to give it, it's much better on sort of these tough units. But on these single wound Def 4 units, not a good upgrade. They're also just, they're a lot of high elf fleets are armed. Their special abilities and their armament don't synergize. Here is a Quality 4 Def 4 pretty squishy unit that is armed with energy swords and shard pistols. Again, I know that the models represented it, but this is not a good unit. It's very pricey, and you really don't want to get this unit in hand-to-hand. You really want this unit to stay back, but then you're paying for pistols and swords. It just doesn't synergize. A lot of their armament just doesn't synergize. Strikers are another thing that they have the pistol tax as well. They're one of the better units in the sense that they are 115 is sort of the best chaff you're going to get. And this chaff, by the way, is pretty bad. A lot of other units that are in the 5 range of chaff have generally Def 3 or Def 4 Fearless. These guys at just 115, they are so squishy. These guys are good in the sense that at the very least you can maybe run them up with a flamer or two. Stealth is almost useless on them because they're just going to be close. But Strikers are sort of one of your best bets regarding chaff. And the thing is, with Def 5, think about this. A 10-man unit of guardsmen or of, general humans can be 120 points for twice the number of bodies in the same def. So yeah, they have fast and scout, but at the end of the day, they're Def 5 for 5 models. It's very easy to clear this chaff. So yeah, Strikers, I mean, they're not great. Let's just put it, they're not great. But they're the best chaff you're going to get. Protectors are a little better than Strikers. At the very least, you're not paying for a pistol tax with them. I think there is a strategy that you can do with protectors where you basically can spam them out. I would never upgrade them with platform. It's just, again, you're going to notice a lot of their armaments and upgrades just don't synergize with each other, right? They have fast, but a lot of their sort of shooting range is in that 36-inch range. In other words, they don't complement each other, right? You generally, I would love to have seen an 18-inch gun for these guys to sort of stay in that 18-inch range. So I think that if you're going to run protectors, you just run them with their shard guns. You try to get them up there, and you try to, it's basically rolling for 6's with protectors. They're the best chaff level unit you have. They're not great, but you know, maybe you can bowl for 6's. But let's get into some of their elites. Things are pretty bad. Again, let's go back to it. A lot of their equipment just doesn't synergize with each other, right? One of the wings is that they have this reliable on their poison, but they're already quality 3. Generally, reliable isn't good on quality 3 units. You're already paying for all that points in your quality. It's just better to just not have reliable on the unit. AP nothing as well. These guys are sort of a dedicated anti-chaff unit. The problem is that the moment you go up against anything like Battle Brothers, anything with armor 3 or 2, those guys are just really one. The other thing is, a lot of these units we're going to get into, the pistol tax is very, very prohibitive because their pistols come with rending going up in points, makes a lot of their sort of elites that aren't the Wraith units pretty prohibitive. They have a decent upgrade with this dual energy swords, probably maybe a saving grace, but they only get one. This Stinger Dagger is pretty bad. Yeah, just a lot. 195 is so expensive for these guys. When you think about sort of a lot of these units that can fight better than them are at the generally the 150 to 160 range, we're talking about paying about 30 to 40 points more and being very squishy. 195 is so expensive for these guys. Gliders are pretty bad too. 180 points is just very pricey for a unit that, again, they don't have good synergy, right? They have a 18-inch range, which is okay. The big thing is they have drop grenades, which isn't a good upgrade. You have to be close range, and then you're sort of not getting... Yeah, like, you basically, with these gliders, you want to drop them in about 18 to 24-inch range, and you want to stay at an 18-inch range and just sort of pepper your opponents. But again, AT, attack 2, AP nothing, and there's no way to buff their AP or hitting. It's just that 180 points is just very prohibitively pricey for these guys. That again, they come with ambush and flying and fast, and they have an 18-inch range weapon with no AP. Drop grenades. It just, I don't think is worth it. Just not worth it. Revenants are, again, they're decent in the sense that they have the best synergy in the sense fast and strider synergize very well together. They have energy swords. The problem is that they have these shard pistols. This pistol tax is just really pricey on them, taking them to an extra 30 points more than maybe you'd be looking at other units. They're about 30 or 40 points more. Their upgrade Fear 2 is just terrible. Again, not a lot of meaningful upgrades on these units. I'd love to see, in my custom army, I've specifically tried to work to make these units have some meaningful upgrades. The Fear 2 is terrible. Alright. So that's Revenants. The best unit I think that High Elf fleets have is these Avengers or Retributors. So this is probably the capstone. This is the best unit really High Elf fleets have other than Wraithguard. And it synergizes very well, right? They're about 18-inch range and fast, synergize very well together. 2 attacks with rending. They are pricey. 185 is pricey for them, but if you give them the Shield of Grace, and I think, you know, it's going to be pricey. You'd run them in a combined squad with the region, and you keep them behind cover. 18-inch range with fast, you can generally avoid a lot of things that are going to charge you, unless you get ambushed, right? And there, by the way, this army can get hard countered by a lot of different armies. At the very least, these Retributors can do pretty good. And in terrain, with the region upgrade, they're pretty decent. Like, yeah, I actually like running these guys with 2 hand-to-hand upgrades. They'll eventually will get into hand-to-hand, and either giving them a blast or energy sword. It's worth it, actually. So I would suggest I would suggest upgrading them with the sword, and then, of course, replacing the shard pistol with a regen upgrade. Yeah, Retributors are pretty solid. Shifters are great. This is, again, probably a unit that I think, if in a competitive sense, you want to run them. I would run them as a combined squad. That's how I'm doing it in my competitive army. A very good unit. AP4 is really great. The teleport and the ambush and the 12-inch range, you can do a lot with the unit. You can either go both is okay. I think this one is probably better. The upgrade, if you really want to have it, is fine. Not that big of a deal. Shifters are great. They're an army that I think, man, if you don't get hit with an ambush or if you don't get a fast person, they're so pricey. And if you sort of don't get a bad matchup, shifters can do a lot of work. Scorchers, I mean, Scorchers are just basically your standard specialist with only 2 upgrades, which is, again, limited upgrades. That's fine. The big problem with Scorchers are the fact that you don't have chaff to protect them. Yeah, they're good. I mean, and they are good. I mean, I think that you're generally gonna bring them with their fusion rifles because they yeah, I mean, you're generally going to bring them with your fusion rifles. Of course, their upgrades are just wonky. Like, they have heavy flamers, but to get a fusion pike, you basically can't have a fusion rifles and fusion pike. Like, I think this is just, some of their upgrades are just wonky. This was actually changed, by the way. One of the nerfs that happened where they put them stock with fusion rifles, and then it basically means you can't have fusion rifles with a fusion pike, which would, like, this is just, again, this was actually a recent nerf that you can't have fusion rifles with a fusion pike now. So, but yeah, I think you run them with fusion rifles. That's where you're going to get those AP4s in there with the deadly. The problem is that they're not that good. You don't have the units to sort of protect them. If you're going to run these guys, you'd want to run them in maybe a combined unit. I always like to run the 3-man specialist units and combined units to really hit that impact, right? 3 deadly shots isn't as important as 6, so I would do that. 280 is okay. You just have to have the units to protect them. Snipers are bad. Again, snipers, here we go back to it. So many units in this army don't synergize. They have fast, and they have strider, and they have stealth and scout. So here's the thing, you have all these rules with a 30-inch range rifle that don't synergize. It'd be much better if these guys were carbines. Like, you have all these rules. Like, I've seen other sniper units that are in the, like, 130s to 140s because they, like, have, like, maybe scout and stealth, right? This just doesn't synergize. Fast, scout, stealthy, strider doesn't synergize well with a 30-inch range weapon. 160 is just extremely pricey for these guys. At Def 5 with only 3 of them, it's prohibitively expensive. They're so expensive at 160. I would just discourage you from running them. Vanquishers, yeah, again, just a unit that doesn't, their heavy support, they did need some other weapons. And this goes back to it, right? They don't have good upgrades. I would have loved to have seen them to put Bright Lances on these guys. They have it in the army. Just give them the Bright Lance. I know that perhaps the standard Eldar army doesn't have those, but they need Bright Lances. Of course, Fast and Relentless are 2 upgrades that don't synergize very well. And their natural surge rockets are 24-inch range. You generally want things with Relentless to have about a 30-inch range, and that's just the impact rocket. It's okay. The problem is it's not great. You can only get 1 of the blast indirects. If they had 3 indirects, that may be something. I don't particularly like blast, 0, and indirect, but it's something. Yeah, but again, a lot of their upgrades and abilities just don't synergize. Fast and Relentless just don't synergize with each other. All right, so let's get into some of their better units. One of which is these protectors. These are the Wraith Guard. They split them up into 2. It's fine. I don't think it's a big deal. I guess you could run a Wraith heavy army, which I guess you could do that with High Elf Fleeces. Run a Wraith Guard heavy army that doesn't have any High Elves in it. Just doesn't fit the flavor of the army. But these guys are good. I mean, the Relentless on them, it's actually not bad. People would say it's crappy, but I actually disagree. I think that Relentless on a 12-inch range, these guys are pretty tough. It's actually better. There's going to be times that there are going to be armies that are going to want to get close, and to have this unit to basically be able to stand there when maybe something charges in and get that Relentless is pretty good. I think both weapons are good. The Blast is okay, but also the Wraith Cannon is... they're good, and I actually like Relentless on these guys. I think it's worth it. Elemental Strikers are good too. The Furious on them, so you always, with the Furious, going for a deadly weapon or an AP4 weapon is going to be great on them. Again, every time you roll a 6, you're sort of maximizing that. The dual energy swords aren't great. Again, this is sort of a useless... I would have loved to have seen these guys be a little differentiated, because the way they're set up right now, the energy, like, to get... You always want to go for shield wall rather than just one extra attack. So I'd love if these energy swords had a bit of a differentiation with them. That's something. Anyway, the Elemental Strikers are good. All three of their options are fine. Either the Killing Axe or the Energy Spear is a good upgrade on them. Jetpack Protectors are pretty good. This is one of these armies that they are good. They're good in the sense I would never put snipers on them. It's terrible. The Shard Cannons, boy, that is a tough one. I wouldn't upgrade these either. The Stealth, maybe. I honestly would just run them at 240 with a combined squad. They're pretty, like I said, very fast with 3 shots at 12 inches is pretty good with Strider. The big thing these jet bikes can do is you can spend a few turns, again, sort of dancing around the outside of the units. You can basically, with a 6-man squad or a 3-man, shoot the squad. They're decently tough. And then on the last turn, you have the ability to sort of rush forward and contest objectives last moment. They're good. Jetpack Strikers are, boy, pretty bad. I mean, one of the things that I think made these guys really good was they used to have a deadly lance. A deadly AP2 lance, or they had a star lance, which was AP4 and deadly. That actually made these guys really good. Now they've remove that option, which is really needed, and they only give them the 2 attacks at AP1 with lance is really bad. Again, it doesn't synergize well with their shard cannons. I think that if you run these guys, you don't even run them with hand-to-hand upgrades. You just scout up, and then you just point-blank range start shooting things. So there's just not a lot of differentiation between the two. Maybe the Shield of Grace on them is okay. I think that if you're going to run these squads, you run them as a 6-man, you give them the Shield of Grace, and then you scout them up, and then just on turn 1, you just move up your 10 inches, and you're just able to start shooting things. Yeah, they're okay. You just, again, I'm frustrated because I used to always run these guys with their deadly lances, and they don't have that anymore. And it was a really good upgrade. So anyway, again, I don't know why they are nerfing this army. It's really surprising that like some of the things they're changing on this army is actually making them worse. It's confusing. Anyway, but Strikers, decent. All right, let's go into... Oops, I lost that idea. All right, let's go into their vehicles and monsters. Generally speaking, their vehicles and monsters, we've talked about it before. A lot of their stuff just doesn't synergize very well. Very fast is okay. 195 is actually decent. Their APC, the problem is that they don't have a lot of stuff to put in an APC. Like, you don't... With high elf fleets, you don't have this unit that you really want to run an APC with that isn't maybe some Scorchers. Yeah. One of the other things is, at the very least, they have a 12-inch mounted shard gun. That's pretty good. But one of the things on their vehicles that is very frustrating is that all of their vehicles have these very fast and Strider, and a lot of their weapons are a minimum of 24 to 36-inch range. Like, again, we go back to it. Their weapons and their upgrade options and their special rules don't synergize. For these sort of very fast and Strider, you actually want weapons that are going to get in that 18 to 24-inch range. You don't want to have weapons that are going to just be you're not really going to be highly leveraging this range. So again, a lot of their weapons don't synergize with their special rules. Again, why would you want to upgrade these guys? Because, I mean, 100 points for 6 shots at AP1? That's rough. I don't know that I would want to do that. And it's because all their weapons are such long range that you're paying so much extra points. I would love to see a short range weapon option. Some 18-inch range weapon options on these things. 12-inch, give them flamers. The anti-grav tank is just extremely pricey, right? It has, at least the 24-inch is okay. Almost, 550 points is a lot. Again, Impact 6 with very fast and Strider. All these special rules add up in points, and that's the big thing that we have to talk about over and over again. This tank has several rules, like the very fast, which just doesn't synergize well with a lot of 36-inch range weapons. It just doesn't. I think that if you run this at 24-inch range. I mean, this is, I think that what you do is you probably are doing, you're upgrading the mounted shard gun, and you're paying about $565. $565 will get you 14 shots at AP1 rending for 565 points. Now that is pricey. Any of the other upgrades just aren't worth it. They're just not worth it. Again, bowling for 6's. Because it's just so expensive. Anyway, so that's the APC. I wouldn't run either of the tanks. They're just, again, they don't synergize well. Your heavy jet bike. So again, I would have loved to have seen an 18-inch range option or a 12-inch range. Give these guys something like shotguns or something. Give them flamers. I don't care what the LR thing is. Let's give these guys some weapons that can synergize well with the very fast and Strider. Some 12-inch weapons like flamers, or just maybe just like a quad shard gun that gets like 8 shots rending AP2, something like that. Yeah, I mean, again, you could do something like a light shard cannon and give these guys, I think this is going to come out to like 5 attacks. Not great. I would have loved if we could have had a few more shots into here. Like, yeah, just, again, it's just, it doesn't, this is like 5, it could get up to like 5 attacks for 215 is, yeah, I don't know. It's not as bad as the tanks. At the very least, it's not as bad as the tanks, but we could use some close range. The Combat Walker is okay. Yeah, it's okay. Again, it has Scout automatically. I would have loved if Scout was an option. One of the big problems in this army is that they sort of force you to take points. Whenever this model would have been a lot better if it didn't have Scout and it had some 24-inch range. Again, it's fast and it's got Scout and it's got all long-range weapons. Could this thing not have some flamers on it, or not have some sort of quad shotguns where it can get a lot of 12-inch range shots? We go back to it, right? So many special rules and weapons don't synergize well, and it makes all these points very pricey. So there's the Combat Walker. The Greater Elemental, I mean, we talked about it before. You know, it's got, it does have a elemental sword, but it's only AP1. Would have loved to have seen that. The shot, I would have loved if these were optional upgrades. Why do we have to bring flamers and shard guns? Just make them an upgrade. These are very pricey, and then you turn into sort of this can easily just turn into sort of a hybrid unit, which is just very pricey. Yeah, it's just too pricey. Fear 2 I don't like, and the Fearless, yeah. There you go. Support artillery is pretty good. So here we've got something that's good. You're generally going to go for the, I mean, they're all okay, actually. AA cannon's okay. I think just the mortar is fine. Yeah, the mortar is fine. One of their better units. The Elemental Titan, pretty good. Like I said, if of all their big guys, this guy's okay. I hate that these big Titans don't have any AP on their weapons. I just think that's weird. So, and that goes back to it. A lot of other big guys, they get the AP3s and AP4s. I think that should just be a thing, where if you're a big guy, you at least get AP1 or 2. Again, it's just very expensive. You can give these guys some upgrades. 16 attacks AP4 is okay, but yeah, it could just get pricey, and that's the problem. That this Titan can just get very pricey, but it's decent. The Elnell avatar is pretty crappy. Again, 900 points, and why can't this be an upgrade? I make this an upgrade, and give him some extra hand-to-hand options. You're paying 900 points, and it's such a man, this wants to be so good, and they just stick it with an automatic upgrade. Let's make high elf fleets more customizable. That would be great. The 2 planes are okay, but I think the Seer plane is a little better, even though it has the caster 2 and no crappy spells, but maybe the +1 defense you can cast on things, and it's got this 18-inch weapon that I think is actually pretty good. So this Seer plane's pretty good. Easily, the problem with planes is that, I go back to it. So one of the problems with planes, especially in armies like high elf fleets, is that high elf fleets are so expensive that you need every model to contest objectives, and when you're putting in 300-400 points, 500 points in units that can't contest objectives, it's very difficult to bring in. Like, if you're playing something like orcs, it's much easier to bring in a plane with orcs, because you can have the units to spam out that are cheap that can somehow contest those objectives. But with high elf fleets, they're very much an elite army, and like them with Battle Brothers, it's difficult to bring planes because you need every model to contest objectives. All right, so we have went through the army list. I do apologize. I may be a little more critical. Hey, this army is near and dear to my heart, so forgive me if I'm being a little harsh. But yeah, I just have to be candid. Okay, so let's get into what I'd consider to be a competitive list. So this is what I have. This list, I'll tell you, has some hard counters. I think that when you're dealing with things like maybe Soul Snatchers or things that have a lot of ambush, I don't want to try to act like this is like a great all-comers list. To me, it's the best one they can do. So one is to have an Elven Noble, run it with a Web Spinner, and you give it Hit and Run. Hit and Run is... I don't like Hit and Run. It's an unfair upgrade, but it is good. And so Hit and Run that I'll be running with the Shifters. And basically, a lot of this army depends on the Shifter unit. So you have an Elven Noble with that 12-inch range. The idea is that these Shifters are going to go in there within 12 inches, just shoot and kill something, and then sort of move outside of the charge range of anything. This can easily get countered by stuff with Fast. Hopefully the Shifters can sort of prioritize units with Fast to sort of stop that. We come with 2 units of Protectors. They're sort of the best chaff that you can get. Yeah, that's the best thing that you're going to get. 2 units of Retributors that I think are really solid. Giving them the Dire Swords, giving them a little hand-to-hand, and I think if you're going to pay the points for these Retributors, you give them Shield of Grace. These Retributors, again, you can do pretty well with them. They're 18-inch range, the idea being try to stay outside of the charge range of your enemy and shoot whatever is close enough. Like, it is a lot of shots. This is, of course, an army that's going to be bowling for 6's, but 2 units of Retributors are good. And I've got 2 units. I've got a unit of Shifters, so just 1 unit. This is the unit that sort of has to do the bulk of the work. It's very expensive. It's very squishy. You are really depending on good terrain, and you're depending on your opponent not having the ability to sort of ambush in on them. One of the reasons that you're going to notice in this army, it has a low activation count, only about 8 activations, 7 on turn 1. So the idea is you want to go first. You want these Shifters to ambush in, and you want these Shifters to go first to sort of delete a key. With a 12-inch range and teleport, it's difficult for your opponent to sort of protect a key unit so that you can ambush, teleport, and then shoot that unit. That's sort of what this army is trying to do. It's trying to just maim those key units and the Shifters to stay alive just long enough. Then you're running some elemental protectors that I have with distortion guns. So I've got some blast in the army, just because there is going to be some spam difficulties here. So I think that blast is going to be good. And then I've got 2 combined units of strikers that I have with the shields and the spears. So yeah, I think this is how you run them. 490 is pretty good for a unit with Fearless, Furious, AP4, and have that shield wall. So your strikers, this is sort of the meat of the army. I always go back to it. In Grimdark Future, you are going to get in hand-to-hand. There's no way around it. So having just a lot of bodies with these strikers is going to be great. And then I have a 3-man unit of protectors, jetbike protectors. These guys are, the idea being is they're going to shoot things. The big thing is this army's trying to, the protectors are doing is they're going to try to last-minute contest objectives. All right, so let's go look at what the strategy, we've pulled up this before. I'll go into it again. Where the idea of high elf fleets, similar to Dow, you want to spread out your objectives. So here on my 2 objectives that I placed on my side, which would be the bottom, hey, those objectives are spread out. Maybe the opponent's going to more centralize put their objective. So when you're playing high elf fleets, you want to leverage that fast. So spread out your objectives. The first thing I think that you can do is when you're setting up, try to set up your protectors and your jet bikes up on a far flank. Hopefully, this can draw some of your opponent placing his troops to counter them. And then afterwards, you can place some retributors in the center and then sort of place the rest of the army in the other flank. So hopefully, doing it this way, you can sort of get your opponent to commit some of his troops on the right, which hopefully will be wasted. The idea being is that you, as the High Elf Fleets player, are going to focus on the 3 objectives on the left, the center, and then the 2 others. So the bulk of your army, those strikers, those protectors, and those retributors, they're going to move up and they're going to sort of clear out that left. And then your protectors and jetbikes are going to sort of swing around here. So if we imagine, the idea being hopefully your opponent is going to commit a few more of his resources early on the right, you can then take those protectors and jet bikes. They're probably going to die, but the idea is you're going to sort of run them. And those jet bikes can probably survive long enough that they can actually get to the center with their 18-inch rush and sort of help deal with the center push. And then the bulk of your army is going to sort of hit the opponent's, hit that left flank, get those 3 objectives. And then the other part that's going to really help out with this army is that you got those shifters with this. So those shifters are very key. You can basically drop them pretty far away from the opponent, and then wherever you need them to do, wherever that key unit is going to be for your opponent, you'd be able to commit those shifters one way or another. The good thing is that those shifters have a lot of mobility, so this can work. There are some armies that this isn't going to work against. I think any sort of scout-heavy army, whether it's alien hives, any army that has some maneuverability, they're going to be able to see this strategy, like a Soul Snatchers. They're going to see what you do, and they're going to be able to commit their forces. And the big problem with this army doesn't have a lot of staying power. You're really hoping on just those elemental strikers sticking around, getting some good saves. I don't know that this army is going to win a tournament, but you may do decent with it. Anyway, so that's sort of where I'd be at with high elf fleets. And again, you need those shifters to do a lot of work. Alright, so I won't cover it here. I have another video that I've been working on my custom army for high elf fleets. Some things I want to do. One, a better spell list. I think make Psychic and Caster, the dynamic, very meaningful. That's in the lore, by the way, that this is supposed to be a very psychically powerful army. So we want a great spell list, and we want something that I'd love to actually give a Caster 4 upgrade to this army. The other thing is that I'm be doing is I want some upgrades that work with fast. So generally speaking, their Stingers and their Revenants, a lot of these hand-to-hand units that have fast, I want to drop the pistol tax on them and give these units some shine. I've done that with other armies that'd be doing something similar. Especially that Avatar. I'd love to drop. I'm planning on dropping the shooting attack on the Avatar, so that that Avatar can do a lot of work with just his attacks. He's very solid. He just needs to lose that shooting attack or make it an optional one. The other thing is that access to more options for of useful units, right? So these, I want high elf fleets to have some flexibility. They need to have some meaningful upgrades. I don't like this idea of pre-packaging all these upgrades. The other thing I'd be doing with the army is I want to sort of make this a shorter ranged army that complement fast. So a lot of their vehicles, a lot of their heavy weapons to be a shorter range. To sort of, the idea being is that maybe the army can be sort of an 18 to 24 inch ranged army that sort of plays with the fast, leverage that fast. They do need access to maybe some sort of chaff. I don't want to give them anything super cheap, but something in the range of some decent chaff that can help. So I'm going to be looking at doing that. Maybe more. You know, high elf fleets are very close to my heart, so I do have a lot of thoughts about that, and I'm working on a custom army. I think I'm almost done with it, but I want to give it a few more thoughts and consideration. Yeah. All right. And the other thing I'm doing actually is I'm removing rending from a lot of the weapons, and I'm going with like a flurry instead. Rending is just, I go back, and I've said it before, rending really should be a specialized upgrade for certain weapons. That's how I strongly feel that way, that you shouldn't be having rending for everything in the army. All right. Thanks everyone for watching. Would love to get feedback, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you're in Austin, join the Austin Alternative Gaming Freaks.